Hello, everyone. Welcome to ConnectCon, presented by FTC Team 9794 Wizards.exe. Join us today on our magical journey each month where you can hear from STEM professionals from Google, APL, iRobot, and more. My name is Anika Sharma, and I will be your host for the session. Please use the chat for any questions related to the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. Today, we're honored to have Dr. Susan Campbell speak about assessing how well AI systems work with people. Dr. Campbell is an assistant researcher scientist at the Applied Research Laboratory for Intelligence and Security, ARLIS, and a lecturer in the University of Maryland iSchool focusing on human-centered cybersecurity. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for taking the time to present at ConnectCon.
Thank you all for having me. I'm super excited to talk about some of the work that I've been doing and some of the stuff that I teach in my class, and hopefully I'm looking forward to the Q&A at the end. I think this is going to be hopefully this is going to be a good time for y'all as well as me. Let me go ahead and share. I'm an academic, so I have to have PowerPoint. I apologize. There we go. So just to give you a little bit of information about who I am and what I do, I've been working in cognitive science for kind of a while at this point. I have a bachelor's in cognitive science and European studies from Carnegie Mellon, and I worked at a software company for a while before doing a master's and PhD in psychology from University of Maryland, College Park. So like Anika said, I work at the Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security and the College of Information Studies at University of Maryland. And I do research on basically how people work with technology, both the how in the sense of how you actually do it and the how in the sense of how well do you do it, right? So what are your cognitive abilities that make this a thing that you can do? And I also teach about how people build and interact with cybersecurity systems. In case we run out of other things to talk about, you can also ask about the time I was on Jeopardy, which was in 2019. And it was a fun time, and I'm happy to talk about it. So I'm going to talk this evening about a couple of interesting things I'm working on. The first is about cybersecurity, like just a really quick thing about cybersecurity. And then I'm going to talk about our work on how to integrate AI systems into human teams. So figuring out what an AI system needs to be able to do to really be part of a team rather than, normally the way we think about these things, you have robots and they work with other robots, and you have people and they work with other people. But how do we get those groups to work together, right? So I'm going to start with the cybersecurity piece. So like I said, I teach at the College of Information Studies at University of Maryland, College Park. It's a group of scholars who are interested in the intersection of people, technology, and some problem that's out there in the world. So like smart cities or database design or surveillance or privacy, right? And so we have an undergraduate major focusing on combining technical skills like databases, web design, cybersecurity, with humanities and social sciences. And we have a focus on things like ethics and inclusion, not just kind of an add-on, like even our intro programming class has pieces on ethics and inclusion. So one of our foci is on this notion of something called socio-technical cybersecurity, and I'll define that in a minute. I'm not going to make you go look it up. That's mean. We also have graduate programs in human-computer interaction, information management, and library science, which is how you can tell we used to be a library school. But I ended up teaching cybersecurity because you notice I said I was a psychologist, right? That's weird. So I was doing research on who could be good at cybersecurity given the way we teach it now. And it turns out that a lot of people were saying, well, we just need really, really smart people because it's really hard to understand the stuff we're teaching. And it's like, wait, but shouldn't you teach it better then? So that was, I opened my big mouth, right? I said, hey, shouldn't you be teaching it better? And they said, great, you do it, which is fair, right? So I do kind of want to take a second and say that one of the other issues we ran into was that everybody said cybersecurity, and they were like, oh yeah, penetration testing. It's like, no. Cybersecurity is this huge field. There's this workforce framework that has like 54 different jobs in it. And they range everything from like writing code all the way to literally like doing legal analysis to figure out like what sorts of information you can legally collect about people. So it's a huge gamut of stuff, starting from building secure systems to supporting those systems, figuring out how to give resources to those systems. And then the protect and defend is sort of what we're used to thinking of as cybersecurity, and investigate. So figure out who did what. So right now we're trying to figure out, there's this huge hack. I don't know if you've been following it, where a bunch of people, and they think it's maybe the Russians, have hacked lots of different organizations in the US government through, ironically enough, a vulnerability management system that a lot of companies were using to manage their IT systems. And so there are people whose job it is to figure out, like, okay, what happened there? And then there's a couple of jobs that really only happen in the government, right? So there's some people who do something called cyber operations, which kind of is like hacking, right? It's hacking into systems for people you don't like very much, and then analyzing, which is getting the stuff from those hacks and figuring out what it says and what it says about whether those people are going to attack you or whether they're going to do something bad. So threat intelligence, for instance, is a form of analysis. But so I'm going to talk a little about why security isn't just a technical issue. And I recognize that's maybe a hard sell because this is a technical audience, but I'm really interested in people. And so I'm really interested in the ways that we can build systems that actually make people's lives better, rather than just building tech that's cool. Not that building tech that's cool isn't cool. So I promised I would define socio-technical. And so here we are. So socio-technical systems are pretty much everything we see around us that includes technology. Because if there is no person, there's no point in having technology in the first place, right? So socio-technical systems are systems where people and computers kind of work together to get something done. And so like your school is a socio-technical system. A company is a socio-technical system. Our government is a socio-technical system. All of these things have both social and technological aspects. And those things interact with each other. So you have interactions between complex technologies and people. So the first approach to a lot of issues we have in security, right? We have this big hack that's going on right now, right? All sorts of other security issues. People just say, well, why don't we just automate the problem away? Can we just like write software that's going to make it so people can't make mistakes? And obviously the problem is more complicated than that. This is one of my favorite Saturday morning breakfast cereal cartoons, where our intrepid scientist is discovering that if she tells tells the computer to eliminate vulnerabilities, that is going to eliminate people. But I'm going to argue that that's not the best way to think about it, right? So the kind of traditional way of thinking about it is, okay, people are dumb. Like people make mistakes and people like click on links they're not supposed to click on, and they make bad passwords, and they, share their location information when they shouldn't share their location information. Like people are just the worst. And the way that we fix that is we write more technology that's going to go in there and make it so that the people can't make those mistakes anymore, right? So we say, well, we'll put in some sort of password checker. It's going to make sure your password's better, and we're going to put in, some sort of detection system that's going to detect if you're getting a phishing message, so you can't possibly click on it. All of these technological systems that are supposed to make it so that people can't make mistakes. And so that doesn't really work though, right? Because the people who are attacking you are people, and you have to actually be able to do your job. And so the more like technology you pile on people, the harder it is for them to do their jobs. And so there's not really a good way for them to, actually get things done if they're spending all their time trying to do security stuff. And so, so technology is making their jobs harder. It's also solving some problems, but people are also more able to solve a lot of problems themselves. And it gets even more complicated than that, right? Because people aren't just like one individual. It's not just me and my computer here hanging out. My computer is connected to all sorts of other devices. My computer is connected to these computers that are, showing you this, presentation. It's connected to my work. It's connected to, all sorts of other things. And I'm part of a team, and I'm part of an organization and part of a family. And, all of these things work together to make the picture that people have. And so these systems out there are set up by people to do particular things. So you have people who set up systems to help you, connect to your coworkers. You have organizations that are made up of people who are all making decisions all the time. You have software that's written by people who are, they make mistakes too, and it's expensive to do secure software development, so they don't always do it. The attackers are people, so they're people who want money, or people who want national prestige, or people who want, just want to show off, right? Some hackers just want to show off. And then there's a whole bunch of data out there that's about people, right? So there's things like you may remember there was a hack a few years ago of Equifax, which is a credit reporting agency. So people's data with like their credit card numbers and their personal information was stolen for like millions of people who never even signed up for that service. That was just, data that had been collected about them. And so that data is super valuable, both to the company that collected it and to the people whose lives have been, negatively affected by that. And it's even more complicated than that, because each of these groups has their own goals. So governments want to make sure that, I apologize for the large truck that's revving outside my window. Governments want to make sure that their citizens are secure, to make sure that their like weapons systems are secure, or whatever, right? Organizations that hold data have some, level of need to make sure that data doesn't get stolen. But the people whose data it is really care, because we're talking about things like medical records, right? If your medical records get stolen, like that's a problem. But if you're a hospital and some medical records get stolen, like, yeah, you might get sued, but you're not as worried about it as the people whose data it is. Then you have people who work for organizations who are just like people, right? The teachers, the students, the doctors, the janitors, everybody who uses a computer in an organization has some sort of goal related to probably doing their job, right? Not actually anything related to security. And then you have cybersecurity professionals who are trying to make sure that everybody is safe and make sure that the company is protected. And then you have hackers and cyber criminals who have their own goals as well, because again, like I said, they want money, they want prestige, they want their nation to do well. And even within an organization, the goals may be different. So what I'm trying to say here is you can never have perfect security, because literally confidentiality, which means making sure that nobody can get data who isn't supposed to, interacts with availability, which is making sure that people who should be able to get data can get data. So the harder you make it for bad people to get at data, the harder you also make it for the people who are supposed to have access to get to that data. And integrity is making sure it isn't tampered with. So that kind of falls in with confidentiality. But those things, literally, you can't do them all at once. Or you can do them all at once, but you can't maximize them all at once. You have to kind of balance which ones you're doing and how you're doing it. And the security goals of an organization may not match an individual's goals. So, an organization may bring an insecure product to market because they want to make money. And the way that you make money is to be first to the market. it's kind of cynical, right? But it's absolutely how companies work. If you write an app, you're not going to necessarily spend a whole bunch of time trying to make sure that you've covered all of your security bases, because you want to make sure you get your app out there and you get people using it so that, yeah, you'll fix the security problems, right? Which leads to all of these, apps and things that end up having security holes that people didn't even look for. And then these security measures can make it less fun or harder to do certain things. So, it's harder to log into things, or it's harder to, send messages to people with links in them. So there's all of these goals and they don't match up. And all of this stuff, it's even bigger than that, right? So all of these things interact from level to level, where you've got your organization security affects the people in it. So if you have some sort of cyber breach, your users, the people who are actually like there on the ground, may have disruptions to their work. Individual security affects organizations. So if you get hacked, they may get access to your company. And then you have security of organizations that are connected. So Target was hacked a few years ago because their air conditioning contractor didn't keep access to their network secure. So there's a whole set of steps there where people were able to get into that air conditioning contractor and then eventually get everybody's credit card number from Target. Because again, attackers mostly want money. In the case of Maersk, which is a shipping company, they had some accounting software that was compromised. And right now the issue is this thing called SolarWinds, which is a network monitoring software that a lot of people use. And so their update server was compromised. And so signed software updates compromised everybody's network hardware. And then if somebody around you is not being secure, then that can have an effect on you. So like if you go to someone's house and they have an Alexa and you don't want to be recorded by Amazon, you don't really have a choice because your friend has an Alexa, right? Or an Echo device, excuse me. And your family knows things about you that they can share without your consent. And then there's sort of this question of who can get access to your smartphone, right? It's probably not just you, because sometimes people have to answer calls for you, right? Maybe that's not true anymore. Maybe people are more secure than they were when I wrote these slides. So all of this is leading up to me saying, like, we have to work together to make ourselves more secure. And so this already happens to a certain extent, right? So people who are working to defend networks, they, work with technology all the time. They work with the technology they're dealing with. But there's sometimes this relationship that develops. And I don't know, I worked tech support in college. I don't know if any of y'all have ever done tech support, but there's this kind of adversarial relationship that you develop between like tech support and users, because the tech support's trying to keep users from doing dumb things and the users are trying to just do their jobs, but they don't really see eye to eye. And so, the cybersecurity people are like, oh, users are so dumb. And the users are like, the cybersecurity people won't let me do the thing I need to do my job. And so there needs to be better communication between the people who are like officially tasked with doing security and the people who are not, basically. And organizations should provide appropriate resources for people to make good decisions. And so I made up my idea of what y'all might be interested in my head. And so I was thinking about, what does this mean for the future, right? So I'm working in this space now, but y'all will be working in this space in, 5-10 years. So what sorts of things can you do? And there's simple things, right? So build computer systems that are secure by design. So make sure that you don't leave gaping holes for people to be able to attack it. And then think about how people can misuse things, because that's a lot of the problem. A lot of the time is that you don't think of something somebody could do with something. So like Zoom bombing was a big deal early in the pandemic, because nobody thought about, somebody might join my my Zoom meeting who isn't supposed to be here. And then consider how the technologies that you build could be used to harm people before somebody goes out and uses your technology to harm people. So Facebook and Twitter and Instagram are really grappling with this right now, where they have these huge networks And they never really thought about the fact that people could be using them for really kind of horrible things. And at this point, it's really hard for them to go back and say, wait, we're going to start over. They can't do that. And then the last one is kind of for all of us to be patient with people who don't know about as much about technology as you do, because we all think, oh yes, of course this stuff is easy, but it isn't. All right, so I apparently sent you the title of the second half of my presentation and not the first half. So this is the second part. So I'm going to talk about some work that we're doing on integrating AI systems into teams. And so, but to do that, I want to talk for just like half a second about, this University of Maryland Applied Research Lab for Intelligence and Security, which is where I work and where we're doing this work. So a university-affiliated research center is a specific term. That's a partnership between the United States Department of Defense and a university, in this case, the University of Maryland, to do research that relates somehow to national defense. And APL is the biggest and most famous, but there are lots of others. There's like 14 of them, I think. And so we're the only one that does social science, but we don't completely do social science. So we're the only one who focuses on social science. APL does a little social science on the side. So we work on all kinds of problems related to people and to technology. So I have coworkers who are working on, how can we make sure that the supply chain is secure and our products aren't spying on us? How can we engineer artificial intelligence that's actually going to be usable for people in the field, rather than just being like some cool tech that, we feed it some images and it gives us some information. Like, how do we actually apply that in a way that's useful to people? And then I have another coworker who's actually a co-author on this AI and team stuff, looking at how to combat online disinformation. And so, because this is national defense, a lot of it is kind of, how do we keep the Russians from interfering in another election? Like, how do we do these sorts of, how do we deal with the fact that people are intentionally propagating disinformation online? But this particular work is, like I said, my coworker came with this great title, There's No AI in Teams. And so the question is, how can we build AI systems that work in human teams? And what do they need to do? And how do they need to work? And this is work with my colleagues, Dr. Carter Brown, Dr. Palitz, Ms. Caraway, Ms. Valkamp, Dr. Schwartz, and Dr. O'Rourke. But we've also gotten some feedback from other people, both inside and outside of ARLIS. So there's a lot of research going on and a lot of interest right now in teaming with AI. And that's not a really well-defined term. It's basically like, yeah, we kind of work together with the computer thing, right? So a lot of it is looking at like autonomous cars. So how does a person who is driving an autonomous car control it? Or how does a person, know when to take control in an autonomous car? And those are really interesting questions, but they're not what we're looking at. So a lot of the time when you say AI teaming, you really mean like this is a person working with an AI system. There's this great term, since you're wizards, this will be great, called Centaur Models, where you're looking at people who work really, really closely with AIs. And so it's almost like they fuse together to accomplish a common task. So people who like work with expert systems that help them do better at chess, or chess is a bad example, but help them do better at, analysis of some variety. Google Maps, right? So that's got some AI features. I was driving the other day and I realized that traffic was stopped ahead of me. And so I asked Google to reroute me, even though I thought I knew where I was going, because I thought Google would have information I didn't have and could tell me how to route around some sort of problem. So there's all sorts of AI systems we're already kind of using in this way. We have some sort of self-driving vehicles. There's this great tech or idea called drone swarms, right? Where you get a bunch of drones and they all talk to each other. I really love that picture. I'm also lobbying, so if we're gonna have drone swarms, the person who is running the drone swarm should definitely be called the queen. And I will not take any argument on that one. So, but in this case, we're really looking at the science of teams. So all of this work that's been done in social psychology to figure out how human teams work together. So what makes a human team good? And what kinds of communication do they have to have? What kinds of behaviors do they have to really work together in a useful way? And so I want to look crazy with the icons, apologies. So I have two motivating use cases, and they're both disaster response, because that feels like a thing that we're going to need to grapple with, and where it matters that we're going to get technology out there faster, right? And so one way that you could think about it is if you had a search and rescue team who had both human team members, and I picked some icons, but you have medical personnel, you have people who are good at logistics, you have people who are good at construction or moving things around, people who are good at code. So you have people who are differentiated team members, you have tools, so the gray things are all tools. We have some sort of air vehicle, we have ground vehicle, we have computing resources. But then you might also have some sort of autonomous ground vehicle that can go into places that people can't go, or a drone that can go ahead and survey the landscape and doesn't need to be remote controlled and can tell you what's ahead, but can also say, hey, boss, I really got to go recharge. Or, hey, boss, it's really windy. I can't be flying in this. Because, hurricane aftermath, weather's not always awesome. So the other use case is a little bit more abstract and maybe not as useful to y'all, but looking at an operational planning team where you have people who are working to come up with scenarios, and then you could kind of have the computer project them forward. So just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, in this case, we're talking about artificial intelligence as some sort of machine agent that's designed with the ability to achieve a goal. So not like a remote controlled device, not like Siri where you ask it to do something and it, just does what you ask necessarily. Something that can function with imperfect and incomplete information, that can work independently of human input. So you don't have to tell it where to go. It will say, hey, I have to go do something. All right, my goal is this. I shall go do this to fix this goal. Can interact and communicate as appropriate with both people and other computer systems. And then can learn from the behaviors that of the things around it, of itself, past performance. So this worked last time, this didn't work, and the environment around it. So that's an artificial intelligence. This is a team. Teams are bounded, sorry about some of this terminology, which means that there are people in the team and there are people outside the team. That's all. You can't have a team that's like the world. You have to have people who are in it and out of it. Interdependent, so each person has to depend on the others. You have to have differentiated member roles. So that could be like formally you have both a chaser and a keeper, or it could be that you have just somebody is a leader and somebody who's going to go, drive the truck around to try to get through the high water. You need to have at least 3 members. And that's just a definitional thing because otherwise it's a dyad or a pair rather than a team. The members have to interact with each other. So if you have an online crowd, that's not really a team because they're not interacting with each other. And the members have to have shared goals. So they're not just like a class, right? They're trying to do something as a team to accomplish something. And so I have thrown a whole bunch of big words on this slide, which are all, most of them are real words, some of them aren't. PowerPoint really argues with me about anthropomorphization. It doesn't like that one. So anthropomorphization means that there's a question about whether an AI should look human or pretend to be human. So the question is, should an AI act like a person? And that's actually really controversial. So there are some AI assistants out there now where the AI acts like a person. So literally there are some, like Google has this appointment scheduling software where you call it up and it pauses like a person. It like pauses to look things up like a person. It acts like a person, but it's not, it's an AI, which is probably not very fun for a lot of telephone operators because people are now like, say asparagus, to make sure that the person on the other end of the line is actually a person. But in this case, we would argue that, yeah, you shouldn't have an AI team, like that drone shouldn't be pretending to be piloted by a person. That would be weird and also not necessary. And if it then, slipped up and showed that it was an AI, you wouldn't trust it anymore, right? Because that's not like you thought it was a person, but it's not a person. And that's creepy. So team members can like imbue these objects that they know are not human with human characteristics, right? So, I think my computer is sort of temperamental sometimes. I know it's not a person, but I've sort of I think of it as having moods. So there's a question of trust. So there's the question of, can a person trust an AI, which, we think is yes, but trust is really, really complicated. And I am not the expert on trust. But one of the arguments is, well, you can't have an AI member of a team because the AI can't trust the people, right? AIs don't have feelings, and so they can't trust people. And so, we went back and forth on that. And what it actually sort of means is that AI systems can look at people and say, this person is reliable, or this person is dependable, or I can depend on the stuff this person tells me, which is something called cognitive trust. But it isn't like that a feeling of emotional trust. It's just, the system can evaluate the people around it. And then there's this question of flexibility. So, if you showed up to do disaster response and you thought you were going to be doing, medical work, and they said, well, actually, your medical license expired yesterday. Can you drive a truck instead? You'd be like, sure. I mean, you'd probably be annoyed about the whole medical license expired yesterday thing, but you would be able to take over a different role or to learn a completely new role pretty quickly because, you wouldn't necessarily be an expert, but you'd be able to do it. An AI that's designed to fly a drone absolutely is not going to be able to run a ground vehicle. Like, they're just not the same thing. And so we have to think about, how can we build AIs that are more flexible, or figure out some way to, swap people out or swap out AI systems or something like that. And current AIs can, do some flexible things. They can engage with the team and learn from that engagement, learn new tasks. It's not like you can't learn anything new. It's that you probably can't transfer from one domain to another as an AI. So we're talking about AI-enabled teams, right? So, it has to be a team. Cool. You need to have 2 people and 1 AI, at least 1 AI. That is also just to kind of cut down on the things that are not teams. We also kind of arbitrarily said each AI must be able to communicate with more than 1 human, because otherwise, your Siri on your phone is not really a member of your project team. If you're, writing a paper or making a video or something, right? Having Siri on your phone is helpful, and you can think of that as sort of an AI kind of system, but it's really your thing. It's not part of the team. So then the next place that you go from there is to say, well, the AI team members have to be autonomous enough to have independent goals, either within the team or separate from it. So like I said, the drone can say, hey, I'm going to go on ahead and I'm going to search for people in sector, N or whatever, right? Or it can say, hey, my battery's low. I'm going to come back and recharge, and then I'm going to do other things. So it has its own representation of what it should be doing, and it doesn't have to wait for a person to tell it to do that. And teams can also use tools. So that Siri thing, right? teams can use tools, including other AI-based systems, and not have those systems be team members. That could be true too. So we built a model, and it is really complicated, and I thought about showing it and decided that that was not going to fit in a, like I gave an entire 45-minute talk on just this model, so I'm going to gloss over a lot of the features here. But the idea is that you have to think at different levels of analysis. So you have people, so we can look at things that are true about people, or individual people. We can look at things that are true about individual AI systems. And then encompassing that, we have the team, right? So you can have things that only happen at the team level, like communication happens at the team level, right? You can't communicate with yourself. You have to communicate with other people. And then we have this other level of like the organization or society. So what does this mean for people who are outside the team? If we have AI systems that replace people, what does that mean for those people? That sort of idea, right? So you can go really big. And then the teamwork as a process, right? So you have inputs, which are like, people show up, right? People show up, AIs are designed. You have something that happens before the team is formed. You show up the first day of soccer and they say like, okay, you're going to do different things, right? Then you have processes and emergent states. So things that happen within the team, you learn who's good at stuff. The AI learns who's good at what. The AI learns who's who. You get to know your team members. You have emergent states. So that's what that means is that you have kind of things that happen that weren't an input and aren't an output. So like trust, the level of trust you have in your team is kind of this emergent state. And then you have outputs. So what does the team do? Can we assess like how good they were, or whether they were effective, or whether they communicated well? Not communicated well, that's actually a process. Whether they were effective, whether they got their objectives done, whether they people learned things or the AI learned things. So, did somebody learn something from this experience in this team? And then you have to look at different timescales. So on a minute-to-minute level, you have processes that are happening. And on like a year-to-year level, you have these processes that are happening. So you get to know people over like a period of time. Your AI system might, so this is a thing that could definitely happen. Your AI system might update overnight. So you have one AI system and then it gets a software update and then it's different and behaves differently the next day. And so that's a question of time. And then the tasks and missions that the team is performing, because I talked about disaster response, but that's just one tiny corner here. So you have everything from kind of military missions to performing arts. You could have a team that was like some sort of human robot acrobatic troupe. That would be still an AI enabled team, right? So you would definitely not want to work with AIs that were not, sensitive to what's going on around them in a performing sort of situation, right? Like that would be awkward. And so there are lots of metrics you can use to figure out how this stuff is working. Currently, we have a lot of stuff and it's mostly like at the individual level because that's the easiest place to assess things. So you assess, how well does the person do their job? How often do they need to turn the Roomba? Like, all right, this just did something dumb. How often do I need to fix it? So with self-driving cars, there's all sorts of stuff about like, when do people actually have to touch the steering wheel? And the system usability, like how easy was it to learn to use the thing? But, in the future, we can still use those metrics. Those are reasonable metrics. But we might also want to assess things that are like trust, right? There are some scales that measure trust, but they're not like super awesome. And they don't always take all the kinds of trust into account. So how do we assess trust? Can we assess how well the team works together? So in Teams research, there's kind of this distinction that it actually took me kind of a while to understand or to realize was a distinction between teamwork performance, which is like how well you are teaming, how well you work together, and task work performance, which is how well you get the job done. So I'm sure that you have never had that experience in a group project where one person actually did all the work and the other people sort of, tagged along. I'm sure that everybody's group work experiences have been better than that. So in that case, you might have like really good task work performance. Like you could end up with a really good presentation that way, but your teamwork's really bad, right? Because nobody worked together, and that person feels bad. The other people like haven't learned anything. Like there's no winning there. And then so team level assessments. So figuring out like how the team's communicating. And then we need new measures of trust. And so the preliminary takeaways, we haven't quite finished the paper yet. That's what we always, that's kind of the thing we produce as papers, right? So the AI needs to have a model of each person and of the team. So a model of this is how this person acts, this is who this person is. They have to be able to tell people apart. That's like the one application of facial recognition technology that I can come up with that's like actually useful. The AI needs to be able to explain why it did the stuff it's doing and what it's going to do so that you're not surprised. Like I'm not fighting with, oh crud, my drone just went that way and I needed to be doing something over here and I don't know why it went there. And the answer may be because it's about to fall out of the sky because you didn't let it charge its battery. And so, it's completely legit. Or it could be, hey, there's a glitch and it flipped the coordinates and so it's going the wrong way. The AI needs to be able to guess what people are doing and what they want. And it's kind of important that it not being completely sure that it knows what everybody wants, because people change their minds a lot, right? And the AI needs to get better over time and hopefully find some way to share what it's learned. So have some of these things that one AI learns be something that another AI can do. And the AI needs to know who to trust and when. This person has just hit their head. I absolutely cannot trust their judgment. Versus this person is actually really trustworthy and seems to be in fine, swimming form. So I'm going to trust their judgment. And so, if you're going to go out there and, save the world, okay, you might have higher goals than this, but here are some useful ones. So build better AI systems that complement people rather than like completely replacing them, because that's not really useful, and are sensitive to people's needs. And pay attention to the broader impacts of the AI that you build. So don't just build something cool and then hope that nobody uses it to do bad. And then pay attention to the safety and security of the AI that you build. Because remember, I spent the whole first half of the talk talking about security, and security is a huge issue for AI systems. So there's all sorts of ways to spoof AI systems and make them do things that the people who are, supposed to be using them don't want them to do. And this is my last slide. It kind of gives you some stuff to look at. I'm sure you're familiar with Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, but I really love this XKCD cartoon that talks about, why it matters what order they come in. So making sure that, you start with not harming humans and then go to obeying orders and then go to protect yourself, because if you start with the wrong thing, then bad stuff will happen. And so that is my talk. And I have a slide for questions, but this is actually kind of going to take a minute to read. So we can start taking questions or whatever. So here, I will go to my question slide and then say thank you. It's been, well, I've talked at you, so I'm really looking forward to the Q&A, because I think y'all probably have insights that I haven't thought of at all.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful presentation. We do have a whole bunch of questions from the audience, so let's start with the first question. To what extent are companies or organizations responsible for protecting data before facing legal consequences?
Oof, so that is a complicated question. So they should be held responsible for it. The way that our legal framework is set up, the only way you can deal with that is with lawsuits, which is really a horrible way to deal with things. And so a lot of people are working on like better privacy laws, especially to make sure that people's data are protected. So there's in Europe, they have the General Data Protection Regulation, which is supposed to like set up some penalties and make it clearer like when security is going to be a big issue. California is trying to do that as well, but I haven't seen a lot of movement nationally to fix that, but it's absolutely a big problem.
So what were the occurrences that took place in the Maersk attack?
Oh, that is a really long story. There's actually a whole book about it called Sandworm, which is it's by Peter Greenberg, I believe. But so that was a situation where Russia it's part of this. So Russia and Ukraine are essentially at war, and they just don't, say it out loud. And so one of the things that Russia did to mess with Ukraine was they hacked into this accounting software that's like the Ukrainian version of TurboTax. So everybody who does business in Ukraine basically has to have it in order to do like some compliance things. And so Maersk used this software because they had an office in Ukraine, excuse me. And so what happened was that it looked like a ransomware attack, but what happened was that all of the computers got wiped. Like this software update was actually malware, and it wiped like literally every computer. And it's a really interesting story because it wiped all of the computers and all of the domain controllers and all of the routers and everything about their network, which would have taken like months to rebuild. But it turns out they had a data center in Ghana that was having a power outage at the time. And so all of their servers were offline. And so their servers didn't get wiped. And so they made sure that they like didn't turn them on while the attack was still happening. And so there was a whole thing where they had to like fly the hard drive from Ghana to London, I guess was the headquarters or where they were doing some of this. And anyway, so they rebuilt their network, but it was a huge problem. And again, it was this third-party software. It was this accounting software that was the problem.
And as a cybersecurity professional, what is the balance between working or training people opposed to building technical systems to defend systems better?
So right now, I think we need to train both users and cybersecurity professionals to be better, unfortunately. What I really want to see for the future is that we do push that earlier in development and that we make more secure systems to start with, rather than trying to play playing whack-a-mole essentially with, we thought we didn't really think about security when we built this, and so we're going to try to like put some spackle on it and see if we can fix all of these holes. So I think there is a technological piece that we really need to do. Like, I don't think we just, throw up our hands and say, this is the technology we have. It's just that we also shouldn't say, well, people are just going to continue to be stupid and we can never, get better at security as an organization because, we can't trust our people. Like, that feels really like a bad thing too, right? So
yeah,
I really pushing for secure development, though. I think we really need to work on not having those vulnerabilities that make it so bad in the first place.
What goes into training an AI model to be able to do similar tasks like driving a helicopter versus a plane, or playing chess and checkers, or et cetera, et cetera?
Okay. So I will start by saying that I am not a computer scientist, and it's been a little while since I took an AI class, but transfer is hard. So part of it is that you can kind of like have a set of structures, and you can give it different training input. So you'd still need training input. With most modern machine learning systems, at least, you would need to have a different set of training data. But you can get it to go faster if you have a system that is itself, trained for something similar. The transition can be really rocky. One of my favorite books about AI right now is a book called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane, who's a computer scientist. And she works with a lot of language models. And so she'll say like, okay, well, I trained this model on book titles and now I'm going to see if I can get it to generate recipes. And so you end up with recipes that include, ingredients from book titles. And it's hilarious, and it's a really funny book. And her, I think her blog is called AIweirdness.com, but don't quote me on that. And it is fabulous work, because she looks at all of the ways that, we kind of make these claims about AI right now that we can't really back up. And you can sort of see where it falls down if you see like where the funny examples come out. So You Look Like a Thing and I Love You was her trying to get her AI language system to generate pickup lines. So her system was like this is the pickup line. This is the best pickup line. You look like a thing and I love you. And so, but yeah, so getting, like I said, I'm not the expert on getting from checkers to chess, but I think you end up like building a structure and then you provide different data to get a lot of transfer issues. Excuse me.
Are there any ethical concerns to incorporating AI into defense systems or military weapons to assist weapon deployment or aid soldiers?
There are. There's a huge field of ethics around that. Which is why we talked about disaster response, excuse me. But so there's a lot of, especially if you're talking about systems that have like lethal weapons, like that is a really big controversy right now. And there's a group called like the Coalition Against Killer Robots, I think, actually, literally, that is saying like you should never allow an autonomous system to kill someone, like intentionally. Obviously, autonomous systems have killed people unintentionally, unfortunately, but and that's an ethical conundrum. Like you've got to figure out as a country or as an organization or as a person, like whether you're okay with that. And I think there are other situations where it's less of a thorny issue. So drones that don't carry weapons, for instance, right? So, that's kind of like normal equipment. And I think we'll see that like more and more just across different applications where you've got, I have a colleague who works at the drone facility for the University of Maryland who participated in the first drone delivery of a donor organ. So like the donor was at one hospital and the patient or the recipient was at another hospital. So that's an option where you're using the same kinds of drones. And so I don't see as much of an issue with using drones for that kind of issue or that kind of application, and also using the same sorts of tech for like military applications, or drones that or artificial intelligences that can like control platforms that carry stuff, or autonomous cars, right? Like, you have an autonomous car here, you have an autonomous car that's, going to transport military supplies. That feels really similar to me. But absolutely, there are all kinds of issues with, can we allow AI systems to do bad things to people in general? Like, is that okay? And that's a big open question, and I'm definitely not going to answer in the next 2 minutes.
How do you plan on sharing your data?
So for this one, we're not actually collecting data, but in general, a lot of So let me back up. So when we finish the report, we're going to try to get it published in a journal or take it to conferences and kind of, also go talk about it to various groups. But in terms of when we do generate data, so some of these things where we're actually trying to evaluate AI systems at work, those things are generating data. And so if we can release it, there are places, normally it's tied to publishing some sort of paper, but there are repositories. So the University of Maryland has a repository where you can put data for people to access it and, kind of replicate your findings or like reanalyze your data. And so that's a place that we're planning to put, any like actual data that we can release. I do a lot of work where we're assessing individuals. And so it's really hard to figure out how to make sure that the data aren't going to be used to identify people. And so that's a big concern because we don't want anybody to be identifiable from our research. Even if we don't think our research is particularly sensitive, like we have to be really careful not to, kind of do things that people don't consent to. It's really important to not like just, throw people's data on the internet. And it's become clear that one use of AI systems has been to like defeat anonymization a lot of the time. So if you put information about people's like age and gender and zip code, like you're most of the way toward identifying someone. And so you have to be really careful with data about people. The data about computers, like we can toss that on the digital repository anytime.
And finally, how was your Jeopardy experience?
I had a great time. It is the most fun. Like I don't know what it's like now. This was in late 2018, but it's a whole bunch of really smart people, and so they have you all kind of in a room together to kind of to meet each other and hang out, and we're all in various online communities together now. They're trying to get me to join Learned League. Yeah, it was just loads of fun. The studio was freezing, but I told my little story about collecting rubber ducks and had a really awkward interaction with Alex Trebek where he asked if the rubber ducks, what was it? It was do you bathe with them? And I was kind of like, how do I answer this on national television? So I went with that's between me and the ducks. And I got a laugh out of the audience, and Alex kind of like gave me this weird look and just moved on. It's actually, so, I mean, it's been a hard month for the Jeopardy community, but yeah, it was a lot of fun and just a really cool experience to go out to LA and see the studio, and it seems much smaller. They also play the whole episode. Like you think that they edit it together, but it really is very much like the show when you're there. The only difference is there's a little bit more breaks where the commercials go.
So that was,
go ahead.
That was the last question from the audience. And if you guys have any more questions regarding the presentation, please email them to us and we will forward them to Dr. Campbell. ConnectCon will not be returning next month, but we will be back with more magic in February. If you would like to be informed about more events and videos by our team, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Wizards.exe 9794. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and check out our website at the links below. Thank you, Dr. Campbell, for presenting at ConnectCon. Thank you, everyone, for attending the presentation today. And also thank you to our alumni, Sarthak Bhaknagar, Angeline Zhang, and Ishan Oberoi for their help. We hope you have a magical holiday season and a wonderful new year.